Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Mace. I'm coming to you from Canada. Yes, Canada. I'm in a small town, and today's video is dumb things Americans have said to Canadians. Let's check it out. I imagine they're pretty dumb. Let's go. To enter this bar in the States, we needed to bring our passports. The security at the door looked at our passports absolutely bewildered and called over his coworkers. They stared at it, confused. Then they called over management, and the manager asked us if they were fake. We stood there for 20 minutes as they went through our passport. They didn't recognize what a Canadian passport looks like. Why would they think it's fake? I'm gonna mute this. I have music playing, my own music. Why would they, as they went through our passport, okay? Continues. Well, it's giving us a long time to read this. If you didn't... I'm going to skip a little bit. Okay, there we go. We legit told them we're Canadian. And yet they were still very confused. As they finally let us in, the group of security checking our passports were Googling what a Canadian passport looks like. Interesting, because Canadian passports have just changed. Now they're black and have kind of a different logo than my old one. My wife just got a new passport, and it's a black one with... There's some different features, but the older ones were blue with kind of a gold logo on the front. Logo, I should say. Canadian crest. When I was around 11, we went to Disneyland. There, we ended up in a conversation with an American family, and their father asked if we really had to get around by snowmobile up there. My dad looked at him and told him that no, we don't go by snowmobile. And that it's a common misconception. Then he said that gas actually freezes up in Canada and we have to make do with dog sleds. The family totally believed it, of course. Of course. I've seen a lot of these, and I don't even think that's just an American thing. I think there's lots of people around the world that think, oh, Canada, it's so cold. You guys live in igloos and ride around dog sleds and, you know, you skate around everywheres. We live in a very temperate place, at least here on the West Coast. All right, next one. I was in Connecticut and witnessed a car accident. One of the drivers was starting university the next day, and she mentioned that I had an interesting accent and asked where I was from. I said, Vancouver, and she looked confused. Then I said, on the West Coast of Canada, and she came back with, Canada has a West Coast? Wow, Rhodes Scholar #1. Canada has a West Coast, ? Oh boy, I tell you. To tell you something, I tell you what, I tell you. All right, next one. Come on. Get to it. Ken Kniff from Connecticut. I used to know someone who worked as a border guard on a minor crossing point. She told me that the guards had a, quote, Second Amendment betting pool. Apparently, they got as many as 4 or 5 people in a week trying to cross with their guns because they believed that the Constitution applied to all Americans anywhere in the world. Classic. Superseding any local laws in other nations. So they had a pool going on how many they'd catch in a month. That's ridiculous. I was in Detroit for work, and some guy started talking to me. He asked where I was from, and when I said Ontario, he went wild with, oh my god, what a small world. I know a couple from Ontario. How is it over there? Is it freezing all the time? Like, it's literally a 10-minute drive, LOL. Boy. The ignorance of some people. And it's not even stupidity, right? It's ignorance, and it's sometimes celebrated, which is the wild part, I guess. I had a German exchange student stay with us in Ontario. She wanted to go to Vancouver on the weekend. I had to explain to her that it was a 4-day drive. Showed her on a map how we could fit 3 Germanys in Hudson Bay, and it blew her mind. Where's the American in this situation? That was making fun of a German person. Way back in the days of chat rooms, I mentioned where I was from, mentioning it was north of North Dakota. The response, there's nothing north of North Dakota. Canada is north of North Dakota. Fargo. Oh yeah. How's it going, Margie? Oh, good, you know, yeah. In 1986, I worked for the summer at Expo 86, which was, of course, in Vancouver, Canada. It was a huge deal at the time, and there were like millions of American tourists. I was asked 3 times, is this money good off-site? At first I couldn't understand it, but apparently they thought they had bought some kind of amusement park currency instead of Canadian dollars. Oh boy. Oh boy. I wonder where these, like, where are these stories sourced from? Kind of piques my curiosity. The 4th time I said, I think it's just park money. And the dad gave me a stack of cash and said, here, give this to someone who might need it. Me, I needed it. Over $700 in real Canadian money. I felt disgusted with myself, but a few ounces of weed spread out among my friends took care of that. Okay. Fair enough. I mean, they were in Vancouver, so. When in Rome. Yeah, I've told the story many times. I'll tell it before the end of this video about my experience in Mexico with an American family. I bartended in a major city. I was chatting with the table and came to find out they were all specialist doctors from all over the United States, but here for some conference. Bill time comes, and one of the women, who was a surgeon visiting a major Canadian city and had been here for a week by that time, sees Canadian cash and absolutely uses her shit. You mean to tell me you have your own cash money? Yeah. Y'all don't just use American? Real money? Man. Our money is real money. Can you give us American back? No, we accept it on par and you'll receive Canadian change. I just don't keep a whole till of every foreign currency. What's on par? What's on par? What's on par? What's on par? Well, it means the exchange rate will be 1-to-1, regardless of the actual dollar right now. What's an exchange rate? I was checking into a hotel in Atlanta, and the lady behind the desk said she'd never heard of Winnipeg and asked where it was. I cut her some slack, being from the South. After playing a few trivia hint games, like saying it's the home of the Guess Who sang what? Let's go back a tiny bit. Who sang American Woman? She guessed England. I finally told her from Manitoba, Canada. She said, how was I supposed to know that? I'm from Minnesota. Then I explained we actually share a border. My father had someone say to him, you speak pretty good English for a Canadian. We must admit, however, that we take glee in perpetuating the stereotypes and misinformation. A friend spent a summer in Georgia with his aunt and uncle and took delight in telling his cousin's friends about dog sledding to school and having to carry a rifle because of polar bears. They lived in Belleville, Ontario, a very populated area. I was at the Tim Hortons at Fort Knox, and the guy behind the counter asked why we all lined up for coffee every morning. I was like, it reminds us of home. He was so shocked and said, y'all have Tim Hortons in Canada? Listen, Tim Hortons isn't even a Canadian brand anymore. I mean, it's not owned by a Canadian company. It's an American company now. And Tim Hortons has gone seriously downhill, yet they still have a stranglehold on Canadians going there for coffee in the morning. It's ridiculous. My friend had an exchange student from Wales, and at the end of her stay, her family wanted to tour the US and Canada before flying back. They told us about the plans to go to Toronto, New York, Florida, Texas, California, Vancouver, then back to Toronto to fly out. They planned this big trip. Toronto. Okay, so this family from Wales. We asked how long they were traveling for. They said 3 weeks. I don't think you can drive all that in 3 weeks, let alone do a bunch of sightseeing. They had to reduce the trip to the eastern seaboard. Okay, so they were a little bit ignorant of how big North America is, I guess. A random Jamaican on vacation knew stuff about Canada, whereas an American asked me if everyone's cars freeze during the winter. Well, if you live in like Edmonton, yeah, everyone's cars freeze during the winter, or Calgary, or Winnipeg for that matter, or Saskatchewan. I, an American, got accepted into grad school at Western, than the University of Western Ontario. On a couple of occasions when I told people about it, their response was, Ontario. Is that near Toronto? I mean, kind of, but also, wow. I was on a flight from Atlanta to Toronto. The lady sitting next to me was very Midwest. She told me that it's her first time flying to Canada. She had friends that lived between Toronto and Ottawa. She asked if we used the British pound. Ay. No, we have Canadian dollars, I replied. Do you drive on the left side of the road? No, we drive on the same side as America. But you're our British colony. So was America at one point. And you don't use the British pound. Did you fight Britain for your freedom like America? No, we just asked nicely and let us go. Not quite. Yeah, we saw an American family one time in Mexico. We were in Jalisco province, just outside Puerto Vallarta, and there was this American family. I think there was 4 of them. So you had a father, mother, daughter, son type of thing. And they were all wearing like matching football jerseys pretty much. And I think they even had like American flags on the shoulders. And they were berating, yelling, screaming, incredibly obnoxious, being incredibly rude to the bus driver. We were on a bus, and everybody was just, yeah, it was wild. It was like an SNL skit, and I couldn't believe it. Like, they were yelling at this poor bus driver, a local, that, you know, he didn't speak English well, and like, it was crazy. I was in California years ago and met some Americans who asked where I'm from. I said Alberta. They asked where that is. I said north of Montana. They asked where Montana is. Oh my God. That's when I realized how clueless Americans. They don't even know their own states. That's pretty wild. I mean, some of them obviously don't know their own states. It's pretty bad. You should probably know the states. The videos that we've been reacting to of people like Americans on the street, whether it be in New Jersey or Times Square, that don't know very, very basic math and basic things, that's wild. This story. I was sitting in my office in Toronto on the phone with a vendor in Florida. It was mid-January and negative 20 degrees in Toronto. She says, horrified, "Are you guys going to be okay up there? I heard it got so cold that the temperature went backwards." Worked at a hotel inside a national park in the Canadian Rockies when I was in my 20s. My hotel had a common stop on the way up to Alaska. I had a very long conversation with some American bikers about why they needed Canadian currency, even if they were just passing through. A set of tourists from the UK expected to just go over to Toronto the next day and then make it to Montreal the day after. Yeah, it's a people ignorant of the size of Canada. That's just geographical ignorance, I suppose. Not really the worst thing. I have so many stories of working in the national park. I wonder what park it was. I was a buyer in the oil patch. A supplier from Houston called me in Calgary, Alberta, and we spoke for a bit. Then he asked me to transfer his call to our Ontario warehouse. I said I couldn't do that because it was a different province with a different area code. He was angry and just thought I was being lazy or difficult. I guess they didn't have a transfer call system in his work. When I was in university, my roommates and I bought a Dirt Devil vacuum. And after a week, it started not working. One of my roommates called the support line from the box to figure out what was going on, and the southern lady took our call. We tell her our address, and my roommate says our city, province, and Canada. Uh-oh. The lady says, Canada, like the state? Once we got her to understand Canada was a country, she then asked which state in Canada. She got likely her first geography lesson that day, and we got a new vacuum. I once went to a grocery store in western New York State. It was a 15-minute drive from the border. I was buying beer, and the cashier asked for ID, so I gave her my Ontario driver's license. She said, Ontario, where's that? It's a province of 14 million people. That's 15 minutes from here. Damn. Met an exchange student from France. He had come to Winnipeg to study art history. I guess he thought Paris was lacking. He was excited about snowboarding in the Rockies on the weekends. I was in Seattle. I was talking to this guy on the subway. He asked where I was from, so I told him Winnipeg. And he said, "Oh yeah? I have some cousins really close to that city. They're up in Vancouver." Yeah, really close. It's only 2,300 kilometers away. He asked if they had birds in Canada. Switzerland, I was lectured about voting for Trump and had to explain we are very different countries with different histories and political systems. And then I had to explain whose side we were on during the American Civil War and where we were during World War II. Wow, so even Swiss people are... That's the thing, like... There is ignorant and stupid people everywhere in the world. There's just probably a higher percentage and density of them in the United States. Sorry, any Americans watching, but that's the truth. I mean, Donald Trump's your president. I got my driver's license taken away at a bar in California because the doorman didn't believe that Saskatchewan was a place. He thought it was just a made-up place, like McLovin's license. And then he had the audacity to get mad at me because I refused to leave without my driver's license. The police came like 30 minutes later and called the guy a effing moron, and I got my license back. The doorman was going to die on that hill. A coworker of mine had her Ontario driver's license cut by a bouncer in Las Vegas. Well, that's ridiculous. Because Ontario is a city in California. Nice try. Oh, boy. Some people. On a trip to Florida, my family went out for dinner. The waiter could tell we were tourists. And without knowing where we were from, somehow we got on a rant about how stupid Canada is. Pot calls in the kettle black, huh? He ranted about us riding polar bears. What did that say? It's saying a boot and all the other stuff. He even bashed our politics. Can't take our government seriously because there's a federal Green Party promoting marijuana. There's also a Green Party in the States. At the end of his speech, "So where are you from?" My stepdad looked at him straight in the eye and said, "Canada." The waiter turned beet red and instantly started sweating, fanning himself with his shirt. We got the fastest service ever, free apps, free refills, and free desserts. We were completely unimpressed with his lack of discernment. Canadians are frequent visitors. Well, not so much right now. But not at all personally offended. Watching his panic throughout the dinner, however, more than made up for it. I was driving down to Washington State, not far from the border. At a rest stop, an American noticed our license plate. We got to chatting, and this man asked us, an hour away from the border, how often we got polar bears. We thought he was joking, but no. He was fully earnest in his question. He kind of scampered away after we explained it. Yeah, we're in Washington State, where like the weather is pretty mild, rainy, but definitely not like Arctic style weather where there's going to be polar bears. I was living in Toronto and became acquainted with someone online who was from DC. She was telling me about her plans to go to Halifax to visit her friend and suggested we could meet up one night. Well, yes, it's so far away. I was paired with a guy from Louisiana. She was Louisiana. I was in grad school in the USA, also visiting the same school. We got talking about Montreal and how there was infrastructure there left over from the 1976 Summer Olympics. He could not believe that Canada could host the Summer Olympics. And 15 degrees outside right now. I met a dude in Pittsburgh once. We started talking. I said, "Yeah, I'm from Quebec." "Yeah, I'm from Quebec." And then he says a friend of his went there some years ago, and "Can you believe they speak French there?" "Yeah, I can believe it." "Yeah, I can believe it." Doing a very poor French accent. Or Quebecois. In Japan, the local people I spoke with in Kyoto only knew of Vancouver. All other cities had to be referenced based on their proximity to a US city. It's interesting that there was a bunch of stories in here that weren't dumb Americans, but just dumb people. One time I had a call about renewing a service agreement that was about to expire. The person on the other end of the call tried to making small talk about the weather and how cold it must be in Canada. It was September. Dayton, Ohio. Yeah, our weather is very mild for the most part. Unless you're in the prairies or Ontario. And then they'll cry all winter long about snow. Holy Toledo, it's Miss Ohio. That's the best ass I've seen in a while. We should be dating, but she's from Cleveland. Shake his caddy. Is that a mini skirt? If it's a maxi, that's the shortest thing for a dress. Cincinnati. Wild. All right. We'll see you all soon. Peace out.